The market town of Serathis stirred like a living beast as the sun climbed higher into the sky. Stalls lined the cobbled streets, their colorful awnings flapping in the breeze. Merchants called out with booming voices, advertising bolts of silk, baskets of fruit, dried meats, and jars of rare spices. Children darted between the crowds, laughing as they weaved through startled shoppers. A blacksmith's hammer rang out from a side alley, each strike echoing with the rhythm of practiced strength, while the smell of iron mingled with roasting chestnuts from a nearby vendor. In the midst of this noise and color, there moved a figure who seemed untouched by the chaos around him. He pushed a wooden cart, its wheels creaking with each turn. Inside were bundles of herbs tied neatly with twine, small clay jars of ointments, and packets of powders sealed in cloth. His clothes were plain, simple traveling robes in faded brown, patched in places by his own careful stitching. His hair, streaked faintly with silver despite his relatively young face, was tied back loosely, and his eyes carried a calm depth that few noticed at first glance. This man was Soren Vale, known to the people simply as a traveling physician. To most, he was nothing more than a healer passing through, a man who mended bones, eased fevers, and left before the town grew too accustomed to him. Mothers pressed coins into his palm in gratitude, children bowed nervously as he treated their cuts, and weary farmers called him a blessing for curing illnesses when other doctors had failed. Yet, there was something about him that did not quite fit the picture of a humble doctor. His movements were measured, almost elegant. When he bent to pick up a jar, he did so with a balance that spoke of training. When he walked through the crowd, the press of bodies parted without him even asking, as though people instinctively made space. He spoke little, and when he did, his words were soft but carried an authority that silenced arguments before they began. Some of the townsfolk whispered stories about him. A merchant swore he saw Soren lift a fallen cart with one hand, strength far beyond that of a common man. A farmer claimed that when bandits tried to rob him on the road, they returned bloodied and silent, never daring to attack again. Others said he simply had good fortune, or perhaps the blessing of some forgotten god of health. Soren himself gave no sign of such rumors being true. He worked quietly, tending to whoever needed his help, taking only the smallest payment for his troubles. Yet inside, hidden far beneath the calm surface, lay the truth: this was not merely a doctor. Soren Vale was once Kael Ren, master of the Iron Wind Order, a name that once shook the martial world. He had led armies of disciples, faced rival sects, and wielded a sword that no one could match. But that was another life, a life burned away in fire, betrayal, and poison. Now, he walked among men as if he were no more than a weary traveler. The scars of his past were invisible to the people of Serathis, but every step, every breath, carried the memory of who he had once been. And though he longed to leave that world behind, fate was already stirring. In the noise of the market, in the quiet watchfulness of his eyes, and in the whispers that followed him, the storm of his past waited patiently for the right moment to break. The sun dipped low over Serathis, painting the sky in strokes of crimson and gold. Merchants began packing their stalls, their voices hoarse from a day of bargaining. Lanterns flickered to life along the streets, their glow spilling across the cobblestones as the chatter of the day faded into the quieter hum of evening. At the edge of the square, Soren Vale began closing his cart. He tied down the bundles of herbs, covered the jars of ointments with cloth, and checked the wheels with a practiced hand. His routine was simple, precise, a ritual that gave him comfort after long hours of tending to the sick. He moved with the same quiet calm as always, prepared to disappear into the night as unnoticed as he had arrived. But before he could take a single step, a voice rang out across the marketplace. "So it's true. You're the miracle doctor." The words cut through the fading noise like the strike of a bell. Soren turned slowly, his expression unreadable. Standing a few paces away was a youth, tall and lean, with the restless energy of someone who had never learned patience. His clothes were simple but neat, his dark hair tied back loosely, and his eyes burned with a fire that could not be ignored. This was Aric Dawnfire, barely 20 by appearance, but already carrying himself with the confidence of someone who believed he could take on the world. His grin was wide, unshaken by the crowd that turned to stare at his outburst. Without hesitation, he strode forward and planted himself directly in front of Soren's cart, blocking the physician's path. "Take me as your apprentice," Aric declared boldly. "I've heard the stories, how you heal the hopeless, how you succeed where others fail. I want to learn everything you know." Soren's eyes narrowed slightly. His face remained calm, but there was a flicker of irritation behind his steady gaze. He steadied the boy, noting the eagerness in his stance, the quickness in his words. Aric carried himself not like a student, but like someone trying to prove himself, a trait that Soren knew could be dangerous in medicine. "Go home, child," Soren said at last, his tone flat but firm. "Medicine is not for the impatient." But Aric didn't move. He crossed his arms, his grin undiminished. "Impatient? No." Determined, he shot back. "I can learn. I will learn. You just have to give me the chance." Soren turned away, guiding his cart toward the street, but the boy fell into step beside him as if tethered. With each stride, Aric pressed him with questions. What herbs healed fever? How did one tell the difference between a wound that would fester and one that would heal clean? Did Soren train under a master, or had he discovered these skills on his own? The questions came one after another, tumbling over themselves with youthful urgency. The doctor sighed heavily, though his pace never slowed. Most men would have given up after the first dismissal, but not Aric Dawnfire. He stayed at Soren's side, weaving through the thinning crowd as if he belonged there, his words spilling into the night air. His persistence reminded Soren of something long buried, of a younger Kael Ren, stubborn and unyielding, refusing to walk away even when the world told him no. For a fleeting moment, the weary doctor felt a stir deep within him. Annoyance, yes, but also recognition. The boy was reckless. But he was also relentless. And Soren Vale, though he would never admit it aloud, knew that kind of fire was not easily extinguished. Inside a modest home at the edge of Serathis, the air was heavy with the scent of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. A fire smoldered in the hearth, its glow painting the cracked walls in shades of orange and shadow. An elderly woman lay on a straw bed, her chest rattling with each labored breath, her frail frame shaking beneath a thin blanket. Beside her sat Soren Vale, grinding herbs with practiced care. His movements were patient and precise, the steady rhythm of a man who had done this countless times before. With a mortar and pestle, he worked the brittle leaves into a fine powder, then poured them into a clay cup of hot water. The mixture turned a deep green, bitter in both scent and taste, but strong enough to ease the fever that consumed her. "Drink slowly," he murmured, lifting the cup to her lips. His voice was calm, carrying neither panic nor hesitation. The woman sipped, coughing in between, but managed to swallow. Her eyes softened with gratitude as Soren adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. To anyone watching, he was nothing more than a skilled and compassionate physician. But as he straightened, his composure faltered. A sharp pain knifed through his chest, forcing his hand to clutch the fabric of his robe. His jaw tightened, though he allowed no sound to escape. He waited until the wave of pain subsided before moving again, his face returning to its mask of serenity. Beneath the folds of his clothing, however, his body told another story. His skin bore scars that no healer could erase. Deep within his blood lingered the remnants of a poison that had burned through him years ago, clinging to his veins like a curse. It weakened him in moments like these, striking without warning, stealing the strength that once made him a legend. For once, long ago, this man had not been Soren Vale, the humble doctor. He had been Kael Ren, master of the Ironwind Order. His name had been spoken with awe and fear alike, his sword a symbol of justice to some, and destruction to others. He had led warriors into battle, faced the strongest rivals of the Dominion, and stood unshaken at the height of his power. But glory came with enemies. And on the day of his greatest duel, treachery found him. A hidden poison, subtle, cruel, seeped into his body, sapping his strength even as he fought with the fury of 1,000 storms. That battle ended with fire, steel, and betrayal. The world believed Kael Ren had perished, his body lost to history. In truth, he had survived, though at a cost that left him broken and forced into exile. Now, the man once hailed as a hero lived in silence, hidden beneath the name of Soren Vale. To the villagers, he was nothing but a healer. To himself, he was a shadow of what he had once been. Each time his hands trembled with pain, he was reminded that the warrior inside him was still alive, but chained by weakness and the burden of a past that refused to die. As the woman's coughing eased and her breath steadied, Soren rose quietly and stepped into the night. The town glowed with lanterns, laughter echoing faintly from the market square. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the horizon as though expecting ghosts to rise from the darkness. His body was frail, his secret heavy, but his eyes still carried the sharpness of a blade not yet broken. The wind swept through the narrow alleys of Serathis that night, carrying with it the faint rattle of loose shutters and the low moan of swaying lanterns. Their flames danced restlessly, throwing crooked shadows across the stone walls as if the town itself was uneasy. Inside the sprawling estate of Lord Brenner, the unease became terror. The nobleman's chamber was lit with dozens of candles, but their warm glow did nothing to soften the sight upon the bed. Lord Brenner, a man of power and wealth, lay twisted in agony, his face frozen in the horror of his final moments. His lips had turned a deep, unnatural black, and faint streaks of violet mottled his skin. His body bore the signs of violent convulsions, as if every vein had fought against an unseen fire. The servants whispered, too afraid to speak loudly. One chambermaid swore she had heard him gasping, clawing at his throat before the end. Another insisted she saw his limbs jerk as though struck by lightning from within. The steward, pale and frantic, shouted for calm, but his voice trembled as much as the servants' hands. Physicians had been summoned, but none arrived in time. By the time the chamber doors were thrown open, the noble's chest had fallen still. Fear spread quickly through the estate. Guards doubled their watch, swords drawn though no intruder could be found. The kitchens went silent, pots abandoned mid-boil. Rumors trickled like poison into every corner of the household. Some whispered of a curse, others of an assassin's invisible hand. By dawn, the whispers had spilled into the streets of Serathis. At the market square, merchants paused in their trade to retell the tale, each adding their own embellishments. It was poison, one declared with certainty. No illness kills so swiftly. Another argued that it was vengeance, the work of a rival clan settling old debts. Still others claimed it was the hand of a hidden sect, sending a warning to every noble house. The city buzzed with speculation, but when word finally reached Soren Vale, the reaction was not of curiosity but of cold recognition. He stopped mid-step, his cart standing still in the dusty road. The description of the death replayed in his mind, the convulsions, the blackened lips, the unnatural struggle for breath. These were not the marks of sickness. No fever, no plague, no common herb could twist the body in such a way. Soren's hand brushed unconsciously against his chest where the poison of his own past still lingered, a silent curse in his blood. He knew these signs too well. They were the echo of a darker world, a craft of killers who masked their blades in tinctures and powders. The townsfolk may have seen tragedy. To Soren Vale, it was something far more dangerous. This was not death by chance. It was a message. And he could already smell the stench of the shadows that had once haunted him. Aric Dawnfire caught sight of Soren Vale standing frozen in the middle of the street. The doctor's cart stood idle beside him, the morning bustle of Serathis flowing around as if the world moved on while he remained rooted. His eyes were narrowed, fixed on nothing in particular, yet it was clear he was seeing something no one else could. "Doctor," Aric called, stepping closer. The boy's voice was edged with urgency. "This is your chance. You must investigate. If poison is at play, only you can uncover it." Soren's gaze shifted at last. He looked at the boy, but his expression was guarded, his voice measured. "I am no investigator," he said quietly. "I tend to the living, not the dead." Aric frowned, unwilling to let the words stand. He moved to block the doctor's path, fire in his young eyes. "Then you'll let the truth die with him? The whole town is panicking. Families are already whispering of revenge. If this goes unanswered, the clans will use it as an excuse to spill blood. You can't walk away. Soren did not answer. He turned slightly, as though to leave, but the weight pressing against his shoulders was not the boy's persistence, it was the memory rising from the corners of his mind. He had seen this before. The convulsions, the blackened lips, the sharp and merciless end. He had watched soldiers crumble on battlefields, struck not by blade or arrow but by toxins designed to leave no survivor. He had seen cups of wine turned into silent weapons, meals twisted into death traps, powders spread on steel so a single cut spelled doom. Poison had been the language of betrayal in the martial world, and it had followed him like a shadow through every campaign. The past pressed close now, whispering through the noise of Serathis. For years, he had lived as Soren Vale, doctor and wanderer, healer of the weak. But behind that mask was Kael Ren, the man who had once led the Iron Wind Order, the man who had fought wars where poison was as feared as the sword. That world had ended for him in fire and treachery. He had buried it with his name, his blade, and his pride. And yet, here it was again. Aric's voice broke the silence, softer this time, almost pleading. You know what this means. I can see it in your eyes. If you walk away, the truth will stay buried. And maybe more will die. Soren closed his eyes briefly, his jaw tightening. He wanted to walk away, to let Serathis handle its own troubles. He had chosen this quiet life for a reason. But in the pit of his chest, the old instincts coiled like a serpent awakening. The nobleman's death was no accident. It was a signal, the first ripple of a storm long in the making. When Soren opened his eyes again, the calm mask remained, but behind it burned something sharper, older, and far more dangerous. This was no ordinary death, he murmured, half to himself. It was a message. And though he turned his back on Aric and guided his cart away, a heaviness settled in his heart. He knew the truth, the storm he had escaped was rising once more, and this death was only the beginning. One death has shaken Serathis, but it is only the first thread of a far greater web. Join us tomorrow for episode 2, as the investigation begins and Soren Vale takes his first step back into the world he tried to escape. Subscribe to Martial World, where legends never die.